You want me to do what to the patient? Zexnal's translucent appendages rippled in horror as she stared at her human instructor. I said, Lieutenant Thompson repeated patiently, if someone is going into anaphylactic shock, you need to stab them in the thigh with the auto-injector. Hard enough to get through clothing. The classroom of alien medical students erupted in a cacophony of distressed clicking, whistling, and electromagnetic pulses, their various species equivalent of gasping in shock. But that's violence, protested Glees, their crystalline form vibrating with concern. We took an oath to do no harm. Thompson pinched the bridge of her nose, a gesture the alien students had come to recognize as their instructor trying very hard not to laugh at them. Again, it happened at least twice per lesson in emergency medical response for mixed-species environments. Okay, let's break this down, she said, picking up the training auto-injector. When someone goes into anaphylactic shock, their airways start closing up. Without immediate intervention, they will die. The epinephrine in this injector will keep them alive until they can get proper medical treatment. Yes, jabbing them with a needle isn't pleasant, but it's significantly better than letting them suffocate. Humans are so aggressive with their medical care, whispered Ythtal to their lab partner. Their feathers were still puffed up in distress from the demonstration. I heard that, Thompson said, causing Ythtal to molt several stress feathers. And you're not wrong, but there's a reason for it. Human bodies are remarkably resilient, which means our medical interventions sometimes need to be equally robust. We can handle it. Is that why your species classified as Deathworlders? Asked Pico, their eye stalks swiveling with curiosity. As one of the more academically inclined students, they were always eager to understand the underlying principles. Partially, Thompson nodded. Our planet's higher gravity, variable climate, and abundance of predators meant we evolved to be pretty tough, which is exactly why I'm qualified to teach this class. I can demonstrate emergency procedures that would seriously injure most of your species. The class watched in fascinated horror as she pulled up her sleeve, revealing several small scars. See these? Practice injections. Didn't even need pain medication. Now who wants to try the trainer on the practice dummy? Dead silence fell over the classroom. Thompson bit back another smile. Come on, future doctors. Sometimes saving a life means doing something that seems scary or wrong at first glance. Who's brave enough to give it a shot? Pun absolutely intended. Finally, Zixnal raised one trembling appendage. I will try, but only because you explained the reasoning so thoroughly. That's the spirit, Thompson beamed. Come on up here. The rest of you, pay attention. This could be on your practical exam. The collective anxiety in the room ratcheted up several notches. As Zixnal approached the practice dummy, Thompson couldn't help but reflect on how far interspecies medicine had come. Just 10 years ago, the idea of a unified medical training program would have seemed impossible. The physiological differences between species were vast, and their approaches to treatment even more so. But necessity, as humans like to say, was the mother of invention. As space travel became more common and mixed-species crews more standard, the need for medical professionals who could handle diverse emergencies became critical. Hence this program, the first of its kind in the galaxy. Okay, Zexnal, Thompson guided. Grip the injector like this. Yes, that's right. Now remember what I said about force. It needs to go through clothing? Zexnal's voice wavered. Exactly. In a real situation, you probably won't have time to undress the patient. The injector needs to deliver the medication into the muscle. Ready? Zexnal's appendages rippled with determination. Ready. The thud of the injector against the dummy's thigh echoed through the silent classroom, followed immediately by the click of the mechanism deploying. Perfect, Thompson exclaimed. That's exactly right. See? The indicator window shows the medication would have been delivered successfully. You just saved your first life. Zexnal wobbled slightly, their equivalent of knees weak with relief. I did it! I did it! And I didn't even violate my medical oath. Well done, Thompson praised. Who's next? This time several appendages, tentacles, and various other appendages shot up. Progress. Before we continue, Thompson added, let me tell you about the time I had to perform an emergency cricothyroidotomy with a pocket knife and a drinking straw. The sound of Pico fainting and hitting the floor with all 4 of their support limbs interrupted her. Their eye stalks had rolled back in shock before they even began to fall. And that's why we practice fainting protocols first, Thompson sighed, reaching for the smelling salts. Gleix, grab the recovery position cushions, the ones rated for silicon-based life forms. As she helped her fallen student, Thompson couldn't suppress a grin. Teaching alien medical students might be challenging, but it was never boring. Besides, they hadn't even gotten to the really exciting stuff yet, like chest compressions or emergency fluid replacement. Once Pico is back with us, she announced to the class, we'll move on to the fascinating human practice of manually resetting dislocated joints. I have some excellent historical footage from something called action movies to show you all. The collective groan from her students only made her smile wider. By the end of this course, they'd be ready for anything, whether they believed it now or not. Halfway through Thompson's explanation of why, yes, sometimes you really did need to shock a patient's heart with electricity, Ythtal raised a trembling wing. Yes? Thompson paused her demonstration of proper defibrillator placement. Lieutenant, is it true what they say about human emergency rooms? That you sometimes cut people open while they're still alive? That's called surgery. And yes, we do it all the time. In fact, I've had it done to me twice. Thompson rolled up her other sleeve to reveal a long, neat scar. Broke my arm in 3 places during survival training. Had to have metal rods put in to help it heal properly. The class stared at the scar in horrified fascination. But how did you survive having your protective outer layer breached? Gleek's crystalline surface rippled with concerned patterns. Humans have remarkable healing capabilities, Thompson explained. Our bodies actually repair the damage and grow new tissue to seal the wound. The scar is just the visible mark left behind. Like self-replicating maintenance nanites? Pico asked weakly from their recovery cushion. No technology involved. It's all natural biology. The collective shudder that ran through the classroom made Thompson hide another smile behind her hand. Now, speaking of survival capabilities, she continued cheerfully, let's talk about how humans can function with only one of several major organs. We call them non-essential because while having 2 is optimal, we can manage with just 1 in an emergency. Lieutenant, Zexnal interrupted, their appendages writhing with curiosity. Is that why the Human Emergency Protocol Manual has a section titled Walk It Off? Thompson actually laughed out loud at that one. Ah, you've been doing your supplementary reading. Yes, human bodies are remarkably good at dealing with minor injuries through a combination of our natural healing and simply ignoring the problem until it goes away. Though I should note that walk it off is not actually recommended medical advice for most species. But it works for humans? Gleeks asked, their crystalline form sparkling with interest despite their obvious concern. More often than you'd think, Thompson nodded. There's actually a fascinating historical example from early human space exploration. An astronaut got something in his eye during a spacewalk. The irritant was causing significant pain and tearing, which is dangerous in a spacesuit. Unable to rub his eye due to the helmet, he simply continued his mission and let his tears naturally flush out the irritant. Problem solved. That's... Ythtal's feathers rippled in disbelief. Incredibly reckless? Thompson suggested. Potentially dangerous? Surprisingly effective. All of the above, really. Which brings us to an important point about treating human patients. We have a remarkable tendency to ignore medical issues that would incapacitate other species. This can make diagnosis tricky because we often don't seek treatment until things are serious. Is that why human triage protocols seem so backwards to us? Pico asked, their eye stalks now focused intently on Thompson. The priorities seem all wrong compared to what we learned in basic medical training. Exactly. Thompson beamed at her student. Because humans can survive things that would be fatal to other species, and vice versa, interspecies triage requires a completely different approach. What's a minor inconvenience for us might be critical for another species, while what seems horrifying to you might be a simple fix for a human. She pulled up a holoscreen showing various vital sign ranges. This is why we're spending so much time learning to recognize normal parameters for different species. What looks like critically low blood pressure for a human might be perfectly healthy for a ZX alien. Similarly, what registers as a dangerous fever in most species is just a mild inconvenience for a human. Is it true? Gleeks asked hesitantly, their crystalline surface showing patterns of both fear and fascination. That humans intentionally raise their core temperature to fight infections? Fever is indeed part of our immune response, Thompson confirmed. Our bodies basically cook the pathogens to death. The entire class stared at her in silence for a long moment. Your bodies try to kill invaders with heat? Ythtal's feathers were practically vibrating with disbelief. Among other things, Thompson nodded. Our immune system is pretty aggressive in general. It literally sends cells to eat the invading organisms. We also produce chemicals that make the environment inhospitable to pathogens and— Lieutenant, PKO interrupted, their eye stalks swaying with concern. I believe Gleeks is about to enter shock. Thompson glanced over to see her crystalline student had taken on a distinctly pale hue. Ah, right. Perhaps we should save the detailed discussion of human immune response for next semester's advanced xenophysiology course. Let's return to our discussion of emergency procedures. She picked up another training auto-injector. Now who wants to try next? Remember, hesitation could cost your future patient their life. To her surprise and delight, most of the class raised their various appendages this time. Progress indeed. As she watched Yith successfully complete their injection practice, Thompson reflected on how far they'd all come. When the course began, most of her students couldn't even look at pictures of human first aid procedures without experiencing severe distress. Now they were willingly practicing what they'd originally considered acts of violence. Well done, everyone, she announced as the last student completed their practice. I think you're ready for the next level. Tomorrow, we'll begin learning about emergency wound closure. I hope you've all read the chapters on human healing factors and tissue regeneration, because we'll be practicing with the suture kits. The collective groan from her students was music to her ears. They might complain, but she knew they'd master these skills just as they had the others. After all, being a doctor in an interspecies society meant being ready for anything, even if that anything involved practices that seemed more like torture than medicine to non-death worlders. Oh, and don't forget, she added with a grin, next week we start the unit on human reproductive emergencies. I hope you've all got strong stomachs. The sound of Pico fainting again was entirely expected this time. Thompson was already reaching for the smelling salts as she finished her sentence. Just another day teaching alien medical students about the fascinating and terrifying world of human emergency medicine. She wouldn't have it any other way. Part 2. Advanced Procedures. The next week began with Thompson standing before her class, a distressingly cheerful smile on her face, and an array of instruments laid out on the desk before her that made several students consider following Pico's example of stress fainting. Today, she announced, we're going to learn about one of humanity's most impressive medical achievements, the ability to temporarily stop and restart a heart. But that's death. Vkr'lak's appendages twisted into what Thompson had learned was their species' expression of extreme distress. You can't just play with death like that. Actually, we can, Thompson replied, picking up a complex device that hummed ominously. In fact, sometimes we have to stop the heart temporarily to fix problems with it. We call it controlled cardiac arrest. Controlled death? Gleek's crystalline form had taken on a distinctly grayish hue. It's not really death, Thompson assured them. Think of it more like pressing pause on one organ while we fix it. As long as we get everything running again within a reasonable time frame, there's usually no permanent damage. What? Ithal's feathers were shedding again. What do you consider a reasonable time frame for temporary death? Well, with proper cooling and oxygenation, we can keep human brain tissue viable for up to about 6 hours, though we prefer to keep any cardiac pause under. The sound of multiple bodies hitting the floor interrupted her explanation. Thompson sighed and reached for her increasingly depleted supply of smelling salts. Maybe we should start with something simpler, she mused as she helped her fallen students back to consciousness. How about we discuss emergency bone setting instead? The look of relief on her students' faces lasted exactly as long as it took her to pull out the bone saw. Now, she continued cheerfully, who can tell me why humans can survive having portions of their skeletal support structure completely removed? The class stared at her in horror. Anyone? No? Well, let me tell you about this fascinating process called bone remodeling. By the end of the lecture, Thompson had to admit she was impressed. Only 3 students had fainted this time, and Vkr'lak had actually volunteered to demonstrate proper splinting technique on the practice dummy. You're all making excellent progress, she told them as they packed up their supplies. Tomorrow we'll cover emergency childbirth procedures. Lieutenant, PKO asked hesitantly, their eye stalks quivering. Is it true what they say about human reproduction? That the new humans actually break their way out of— Save those questions for tomorrow, Thompson interrupted quickly, having learned from experience that detailed discussions of human childbirth tended to traumatize her alien students more than any other topic. And yes, I'll be bringing in the anatomically correct birthing simulator. The collective shudder that ran through the classroom was entirely expected. As her students filed out, Thompson couldn't help but smile. They were adapting to human medical practices far better than anyone had predicted. Yes, there were still occasional fainting spells. And yes, she'd had to requisition an unprecedented number of smelling salts. But they were learning. More importantly, they were beginning to understand the fundamental principle behind human emergency medicine. Sometimes you had to do something that seemed horrible in the short term to achieve the best possible outcome for the patient. Lieutenant? Zexnal had lingered behind after class. I've been studying the supplementary materials you provided, and I have a question about human emergency protocols. Go ahead, Thompson encouraged. Is it true that humans sometimes restart hearts by physically compressing the thoracic cavity with their appendages? Ah, you're asking about CPR. Yes, that's absolutely true. In fact, that's next week's practical lesson. We'll be using the pressure-sensitive dummies to practice proper compression depth and rhythm. Zexnal's appendages writhed in a complex pattern that Thompson had learned to interpret as a mix of fascination and horror. But how do you prevent causing additional injury? The force required to compress the thoracic cavity sufficiently to pump blood. Sometimes we do cause additional injury, Thompson admitted. Broken ribs are pretty common during CPR. But, let me guess, Zexnal interrupted, their tones suggesting they were finally beginning to understand human medical philosophy. Better a few broken ribs than death? Exactly. Thompson beamed at her student. You're getting it. Sometimes the cure looks worse than the disease, but the outcome justifies the means. I believe I understand now why the humans section of our xenobiology textbook is labeled, "Warning, contains disturbing content." Thompson laughed. Just wait until we get to the chapter on battlefield medicine. There's a reason human combat medics are considered simultaneously the most terrifying and most valuable personnel in mixed-species combat units. Do I want to know why? Let's just say that human emergency medical techniques become even more creative when we have to improvise under fire. Did you know you can use a credit chip to perform an emergency chest decompression? I think I need to lie down, Zexnal said faintly. Use the recovery position cushions, Thompson called after their retreating form. And don't forget to read Chapter 7 for tomorrow, Emergency Management of Multiple Compound Fractures. The sound of Zexnal's distressed clicking faded down the hallway. Tomorrow's class would certainly be interesting, Thompson thought as she packed up her demonstration materials. She still hadn't told them about the time she'd had to use a rusty nail and a piece of string to save someone's life during a deep space rescue mission. But that story could wait. For now, she had to prepare for tomorrow's lectures. The birthing simulator needed new batteries, and she had to make sure the artificial amniotic fluid was properly heated to human body temperature. After all, if her students were going to learn about human medical procedures, they might as well get the full experience, even if it did mean going through smelling salts at an alarming rate. Part 3, Field Medicine. Today's lesson will be a little different, Thompson announced, leading her class into what appeared to be an environmental simulation chamber. We're going to practice emergency medicine in non-standard conditions. The chamber's walls shimmered, transforming into a rocky landscape with harsh winds whipping dust through the air. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the lighting shifted to simulate the glow of 3 distant moons. Welcome to Kepler 186F, Thompson said cheerfully. Or at least a reasonable facsimile thereof. This is where you'll be conducting your first field medicine practical exam. But this environment is highly unsuitable for most of our species, Pico observed, their eye stalks contracting against the simulated wind. Exactly, Thompson beamed. Emergency medicine rarely happens in perfect conditions. You need to learn to work while compensating for environmental challenges. She gestured to several environmental suits stored along the wall. These are rated for your various species requirements. You have 3 minutes to suit up before the scenario begins. What scenario? Gleeks asked, their crystalline form already showing stress patterns. Oh, didn't I mention? Thompson's grin was downright unsettling. We're simulating a mining accident. Multiple casualties, minimal equipment, and you'll need to stabilize the patients long enough for evacuation. The class stared at her in horror. 2 minutes, 50 seconds remaining for suit-up, Thompson announced cheerfully. Oh, and fair warning, the simulation includes random equipment failures and environmental hazards, just like real life. The scramble for environmental suits was rather undignified. Remember, Thompson called out as her students struggled with their gear. Human patients can survive significant blood loss, but you need to prevent shock. Also, don't forget about the possibility of internal injuries. Lieutenant, Zexnal asked, their voice slightly distorted through their suit's communication system. What exactly do you mean by random equipment failures? As if in answer, the lights flickered ominously. You have got to be kidding, Ithtal muttered, their feathers attempting to puff up inside their suit. Welcome to emergency medicine, Thompson announced as the chamber filled with the sounds of simulated explosions and human screams. Your time starts now. What followed was, in Thompson's professional opinion, both highly educational and enormously entertaining to watch. Vkr'lak, showing remarkable progress from their initial horror at human medical procedures, actually managed to properly stabilize a simulated compound fracture, even if they did emit distressed clicking sounds throughout the entire process. Pico proved surprisingly adept at maintaining their composure while treating a patient with simulated internal bleeding, though they did have to take a moment to recover after the patient vomited artificial blood. Gleeks, despite their crystalline nature making them particularly unsuited for rapid movement, demonstrated excellent judgment in prioritizing injuries and directing their teammates. And Ithtal, much to everyone's surprise, turned out to have a particular talent for improvising medical equipment from available materials. Though Thompson made a mental note to discuss why using someone's bootlaces as a tourniquet might not be the best first choice. The simulation ended with all patients stabilized and ready for evacuation, though the chamber now looked like a war zone, and several pieces of medical equipment had been sacrificed in creative ways. Excellent work, everyone, Thompson announced as the environment shimmered back to normal. Only 2 instances of nervous system shutdown, and no one tried to euthanize any human patients for injuries that would have been fatal to their own species. That's a significant improvement from last month's practical. Lieutenant, PKO asked weakly as they removed their environment suit. Was it really necessary to make the simulated humans so vocal about their injuries? Absolutely, Thompson nodded. Human patients tend to be extremely expressive when injured. You need to learn to work through the screaming. And the swearing? Gleeks asked, their crystal surface still showing stress patterns. Oh, that was actually toned down from reality, Thompson assured them. You should hear a real human with a broken femur. The language gets quite creative. I have a question about the simulation parameters, Vkr'lak interjected, their appendages still trembling slightly. The third patient's blood pressure readings seemed impossible for a living organism. Ah, you noticed that. Thompson grinned. Humans can survive with remarkably low blood pressure in emergency situations. Our circulatory system compensates by redirecting blood flow to vital organs. We can lose up to about 40% of our total blood volume and still survive with proper treatment. The collective shudder that ran through the class was entirely expected. Which brings me to tomorrow's lesson, Thompson continued cheerfully. We'll be covering emergency blood replacement procedures, including field-expedient transfusion techniques. Please tell me that doesn't involve what I think it does, Ithtal muttered. If you're thinking about direct person-to-person blood transfer using improvised equipment, then yes, that's exactly what it involves. Thompson's enthusiasm was, as usual, inversely proportional to her students' comfort levels. But that's practically ritualistic blood sharing. Pico's eye stalks were rapidly losing color. Now you're getting it, Thompson beamed. Human emergency medicine does sometimes look a bit like ancient ritual practices. Wait until we cover scarification techniques for identifying medical information in survival situations. The sound of multiple bodies hitting the floor suggested that perhaps she should have saved that particular revelation for another day. As Thompson began distributing smelling salts to her fallen students, she couldn't help but feel proud of their progress. Yes, they still fainted at some of the more extreme aspects of human medical practices. And yes, they probably all needed therapy to deal with what they'd learned about human biology. But they were learning. More importantly, they were beginning to understand that what looked like barbaric violence to their species was often the most effective way to save a human life. Once everyone's conscious again, she announced to the gradually recovering class, we'll review the footage from today's practical. Pay special attention to the improvised chest drain demonstration. You'll be replicating that procedure tomorrow. The renewed sound of bodies hitting the floor suggested that perhaps she should have waited a few more minutes before making that announcement. Oh well, at least they were getting plenty of practice with recovery positions. Part 4. Real emergency. It was supposed to be a routine training day. Thompson had planned to introduce her students to the concept of emergency cauterization, complete with the traditional warnings about not fainting. She'd even prepared a special demonstration involving a heated metal rod and a synthetic flesh simulator. The universe, it seemed, had other plans. The emergency alert blared through the medical training facility just as Thompson was explaining why humans considered third-degree burns serious but not immediately fatal. "Attention all medical personnel," the automated system announced. "All. Multiple casualties incoming. Training Base 7 is now converted to emergency triage. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." Thompson's demeanor shifted instantly from cheerful instructor to professional emergency responder. "Right, everyone. This is what we've been training for. Suit up and prepare for incoming casualties." But we're still students," Co protested, their eye stalks whirling in panic. "Not anymore," Thompson replied grimly. "There's been an accident in the station's engineering section. Multiple species affected, including humans. We're the closest medical facility, and right now, you're all we've got." The class stared at her in horror. "Remember your training," Thompson continued, already pulling on her own emergency gear. "Triage protocols by species. Stabilize according to physiological requirements. And for the love of all that's sacred, try not to faint when you see real human blood." The first casualties arrived before she'd even finished speaking. The doors burst open to admit a hovering stretcher carrying a human engineer with what appeared to be severe plasma burns down one side of their body. To Thompson's immense pride, her students didn't hesitate. "Third-degree burns over approximately 40% of body surface area," Vkr'lak announced, their appendages already reaching for the appropriate treatment kit. "Vital signs stable but indicating early shock response. Patient's core temperature elevated," PKO added, their eye stalks scanning the medical readouts. "Implementing human-specific burn protocols." "Get me a synthetic skin spray and start a fluid replacement line," Thompson ordered, watching as her students moved with surprising efficiency. "Remember, humans can replace lost fluids faster than most species, so don't be shy with the volume." More casualties arrived. A crystalline being with severe structural damage, a methane breather with compromised environmental systems, and 2 more humans with various injuries. Thompson watched with growing pride as her students handled each case with remarkable competence. Yes, there was still some squeamishness when dealing with human injuries. She noticed Ethal's feathers attempting to shed inside their environmental suit when they had to clean a particularly nasty laceration, but no one fainted. Not even when one of the human patients started describing, in vivid detail, exactly how they'd gotten their arm caught in the malfunctioning plasma conduit. "Fascinating," Pico muttered, apparently forgetting their usual squeamishness in their professional focus. "The patient remains conscious and coherent despite injuries that would be fatal to most species." "Welcome to human emergency medicine," Thompson replied, deftly inserting an IV line, "where the patients keep talking even when you really wish they wouldn't." "Is it normal for them to make jokes about their own injuries?" Glix asked, their crystalline form showing patterns of confusion as they assisted with bandaging. "Oh, that's a classic human coping mechanism," Thompson explained. "If they're making terrible puns about their situation, they're probably going to be fine." "I meant to give engineering a hand today," the injured engineer quipped from the treatment bed. "But this wasn't quite what I had in mind." "See?" Thompson gestured to her patient. "Terrible injury puns. Definitely going to survive." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Thompson's students performed admirably, handling everything from basic wound care to complex multi-species triage situations. They even managed to implement some of their more creative training solutions, including Ythal's improvised pressure bandages made from spare environmental suit seals. By the time the last patient had been stabilized and transferred to the main medical bay, Thompson's students looked exhausted but satisfied. "Well done, everyone," she announced as they began cleaning up the emergency bay. "You've just completed your first real emergency response situation. How does it feel?" "Terrifying," Pico admitted, their eye stalks drooping with fatigue. "Fascinating," Vkr'lak added, their appendages moving in a pattern that indicated deep thought. "Surprisingly logical," Glix contributed, their crystal surface showing patterns of satisfaction. "Less horrifying than expected," Ethtal concluded, finally allowing their feathers to shed properly now that the crisis was over. "Excellent," Thompson beamed at them. "You're all beginning to think like proper emergency medical professionals. Now who's ready to learn about emergency amputation techniques?" The collective groan from her students was music to her ears. "I'm kidding," she assured them. "That's next week's lesson. Tomorrow we'll start with something simpler. Emergency tooth extraction." The sound of PKO fainting was so familiar by now that Thompson had already reached for the smelling salts before they hit the floor. Some things, it seemed, never changed, but her students had proven themselves today. They'd faced real emergency situations involving multiple species and hadn't panicked once. Well, hadn't panicked obviously anyway. More importantly, they'd begun to understand the fundamental truth about human emergency medicine. What looked like barbaric violence to other species was often the most effective way to save a life. Lieutenant? Zexnal asked as they helped revive Pico. Is it true what the engineering patient said about humans sometimes performing emergency surgery on themselves? Ah, Thompson grinned. That's actually next month's lesson. Self-surgery in survival situations. I've got some fascinating historical footage to show you all. The sound of multiple bodies hitting the floor suggested that perhaps she should work on her timing. Oh well, at least they had plenty of practice with recovery positions now. To be continued. And then the human just smiled at me. Kazik's mandibles clicked nervously as he wrapped all four arms around his drinking vessel. The gathered soldiers leaned in closer, their various appendages twitching with anticipation. Smiled, like showed teeth? Young Tralxa asked, her crystalline form reflecting the dim bar lights and shimmering patterns of anxiety. Worse. Kazik took a long drink. They showed teeth and maintained direct eye contact. A collective shudder ran through the group. Even grizzled old Vkr'lak, whose carapace bore the scars of 17 campaigns, shifted uncomfortably on his perch. But you survived serving alongside them for 3 cycles, Vkr'lak rumbled. Surely they can't all be as intense as the stories suggest. Kezik chittered what passed for laughter in his species. Oh, my sweet summer larva. Let me tell you about my first deployment with Human Strike Force Delta. The stories don't do them justice. The veteran settled back, his iridescent wings fluttering slightly as he organized his thoughts. The bar's usual cacophony of mixed-species chatter faded to background noise as his fellow soldiers waited expectantly. Even the bartender, a gelatinous mass of semi-sentient protoplasm, oozed closer to listen. It was during the Nexus War. My unit got attached to a human squad after the hive mind decimated half our forces. I thought I'd seen everything in my 10 cycles of service. The glass storms of Rigel 7, the living mountains of Theta Perseus, the quantum anomalies in the Carina Nebula. But nothing prepared me for serving with humans. He paused dramatically, mandibles twitching. Did you know they can heal from almost anything? I watched my human squad leader get half their torso burned away by plasma fire. Know what they did? Looked down at the wound, said, "Well, that's inconvenient," and kept fighting for another 3 hours until medical evacuation arrived. Impossible, Tralxa whispered, her crystalline form vibrating with disbelief. I wish it was. Their medical officer explained it later. Something about their bodies constantly regenerating cells and their bones being partially self-repairing. They're practically immortal by our standards, but that's not even the scariest part. Vkr'lak leaned forward. What could be scarier than unkillable Deathworlders? Their sense of humor. Kazik shuddered visibly. They laugh at everything. Death, danger, their own injuries. It's all just one big joke to them. We were pinned down once, surrounded by hive drones, running low on ammo. Know what my squad leader did? Started making puns about the situation. Puns? Asked a tentacled Medusan who drifted over to listen. Wordplay. Jokes based on words having multiple meanings. They were getting shot at and making jokes about it being a sticky situation because the hive uses organic adhesive weapons. Then they'd laugh. In the middle of combat. The gathered aliens exchanged worried glances. Everyone had heard stories about humans, of course. The Deathworlders were legendary across the galaxy for their resilience and combat prowess. But hearing first-hand accounts from a decorated veteran was something else entirely. Tell us about the coffee incident, rumbled Vkr'lak, who'd clearly heard some of Kazik's stories before. Kazik's mandibles clicked rapidly, the equivalent of a human facepalm. I was hoping to forget that one, but since you asked... He took another long drink. So humans have this stimulant they consume called coffee. It's basically liquid energy extracted from roasted beans. Completely toxic to most species, but they drink it by the gallon. That doesn't sound so bad, Tralxa offered. I'm getting to the bad part. We were on a long-range recon mission. Supposed to be silent running for 3 days. Our supply officer accidentally packed the wrong provisions. Instead of their normal coffee, they got decaf. What's decaf? The Medusan asked. Coffee with the stimulant removed. Apparently this is some kind of cruel joke to humans. When they found out, they didn't get angry. They got creative. Kazik's wings rustled nervously. They started collecting various local flora, testing them for caffeine content. Do you have any idea how terrifying it is to watch a human cheerfully sample potentially lethal alien plants just because they want their morning stimulant fix? The bar had grown quieter as more patrons drifted over to listen. Zek's reputation as a storyteller was well known in this sector, but there was something special about his human tales. "Did they find a substitute?" someone called from the back. "Oh yes. They found this bright purple vine that contained something close enough to caffeine. The fact that it made their eyes glow for 6 hours was apparently just a fun bonus. They called it space coffee and tried to market it to other human units afterward." Vorthak's mandibles twitched in what passed for a smile. "Tell them about the gravity well incident." Kashyyyk chittered again. "Now that was truly insane. We were evacuating civilians from a moon that was being torn apart by gravitational forces. The humans discovered that if they timed it right, they could use the fluctuating gravity wells to slingshot escape pods to safety. It was completely crazy. The math involved calculating trajectory through variable gravity fields would take our best computers hours." "So they called for computational support?" Tralxa asked. "Nope. They did it by eyeballing it and saying, and I quote, 'This feels about right.' And it worked. They saved 300 civilians using a technique that violated several laws of physics, all because it felt right. Who does that?" The gathered soldiers murmured in amazement and horror. Humans were well known for their bizarre relationship with danger, but this was beyond normal parameters. "But surely they have limits?" a new voice asked. A young Arcturian cadet had joined the group, their bioluminescent patterns showing intense curiosity. Kazyk's antennae wiggled in what might have been amusement. "You'd think so, wouldn't you? Let me tell you about what they call extreme sports. In their downtime, when normal species would be resting or recovering, humans deliberately seek out dangerous activities for fun." "Define dangerous," Vorthak prompted, knowing where this was going. "They jump out of perfectly functional aircraft. They climb sheer cliff faces without safety equipment. They strap boards to their feet and slide down mountains covered in frozen water. They dive into ocean trenches just to see what's down there. And this is what they do for recreation." The cadet's bioluminescence flickered in patterns of disbelief. That's insane." "That's humans for you. But here's the thing. They're not actually insane. They're incredibly intelligent, capable of complex strategic thinking and amazing technological innovations. They just choose to do crazy things anyway." Kashyyyk leaned forward conspiratorially. "Want to know the scariest thing about humans? Their capacity for friendship. Once a human decides you're their friend, they will literally walk through plasma fire to help you. I've seen it happen." His voice grew softer, taking on an almost reverent tone. "We were pinned down in the ruins of a hive colony. I'd taken a hit to my lower thorax. Nothing immediately fatal, but I couldn't move. The evacuation point was 1/2 kilometer away through heavy fire. My squad leader looked at me, looked at the gauntlet of death we'd have to run, and said, 'No one gets left behind.'" The bar had grown completely silent now, every being focused on Kazyk's story. "They picked me up, all 180 kilos of me, and ran through plasma fire, artillery strikes, and a swarm of hive drones. They got hit 3 times. I could smell their flesh burning. But they kept running, making terrible jokes the whole time about how this would make a great story later. And you know what? They were right." Kashyyyk raised his drink in a toast. "To the humans of Strike Force Delta, the craziest, bravest, most terrifying allies anyone could ask for." The gathered soldiers raised their various drinking vessels in response. "To the humans! They're still out there, you know," Kashyyyk added quietly. "Still fighting the good fight. Still doing the impossible. Still making horrible puns in the face of death. And thank the cosmic consciousness for that. Because when the really bad stuff happens, when the hive mind unleashes some new horror, or the quantum anomalies start eating reality again, you want humans on your side." "Because they're unkillable?" Tralxa asked. "Because they're human," Kashyyyk replied simply. "Because they'll look at an impossible situation, grin that terrifying teeth-baring grin, and say, 'Hold my coffee,' before doing something that violates the laws of physics, probability, and common sense, and somehow make it work." The veteran settled back, his wings rustling softly. "You know, I served with a lot of species during the Nexus War. Saw a lot of courage, a lot of sacrifice. But humans? Humans are something special. They're not just warriors or survivors. They're artists of chaos, masters of the impossible. And the craziest part? They don't even think what they do is particularly special. Surely they must realize they're different, the Medusan asked. Kzik chittered again. Oh, they know they're different. They just think everyone else is the weird one. I once asked my squad leader why humans do the things they do. Know what they said? Life's too short to let physics tell you what's possible. The gathered soldiers pondered this for a moment, trying to wrap their various forms of consciousness around the human perspective. I heard a rumor, Vkr'lak said slowly, that the hive mind actually tried to analyze human behavior patterns to predict their actions. Oh, that's true, Kzik confirmed. The aftermath was hilarious. Apparently the analytical matrices couldn't handle the contradictions and started producing nonsense. The hive mind had to quarantine that entire section of its consciousness to prevent the logic errors from spreading. So they're not just physically resilient, they're psychologically weapon-grade too? The cadet asked, their bioluminescence showing both awe and terror. Exactly. The hive mind works on pure logic. Humans operate on a mixture of logic, intuition, and what they call vibes. Try to predict that with an analytical engine and you'll fry your processors every time. Kzik finished his drink and signaled the protoplasmic bartender for another. You want to know the real reason the hive mind is losing this war? It's not our superior technology or our greater numbers. It's because you can't outthink an enemy that doesn't think like anything else in the known universe. But surely there must be some way to understand them, Tralxa insisted. Oh, you can understand them. You can even predict them, sort of, once you've worked with them long enough. But you have to stop trying to apply normal logic. Instead, you have to ask yourself, what would be the most simultaneously brilliant and ridiculous thing to do in this situation? Whatever you come up with, that's probably what the humans are planning. The veteran's mandibles clicked in remembered amusement. I once watched a human sergeant explain their battle plan to our tactical AI. The AI spent 3 hours trying to explain why the plan was impossible. The sergeant listened patiently, then said, "Yeah, that's why it'll work. Nobody will expect it." And you know what? They were right. So how do you cope? The cadet asked. Serving alongside beings like that? Kazik's antennae waved thoughtfully. You learn to embrace the chaos. You learn that sometimes the craziest plan is the best plan. You learn that when a human says, "I have an idea," you should either take cover or grab a camera, because something amazing is about to happen. He looked around at his fellow soldiers, his compound eyes reflecting the bar's dim lighting. But most importantly, you learn to trust them. Because for all their crazy ideas and death-defying stunts, humans are the most loyal, dedicated allies you could ask for. Yes, they might suggest using a quantum anomaly as a makeshift slingshot to bypass enemy defenses. Yes, they might decide to challenge a hive drone to a dance-off as a distraction tactic. But they will never, ever leave you behind. Woo. They actually did that? The dance-off thing? Vkr'lak asked incredulously. Oh yes, the drone was so confused it actually stopped attacking for a full minute. That was all we needed to flank it. The humans called it psychological warfare. I called it insanity. We were both right. Kazik's mandibles clicked in a way that suggested he was smiling at the memory. You know what the humans said afterward? If it's stupid but it works, it's not stupid. That's become something of a motto for mixed species units working with humans. The veteran looked around at his captivated audience. So next time you hear you're being deployed with human allies, don't panic. Yes, they're crazy. Yes, they'll probably do something that makes you question everything you know about tactical doctrine. But they're the good kind of crazy, the kind that wins wars and saves lives, even if it gives your tactical officers anxiety attacks in the process. He raised his fresh drink. To humans, the galaxy's most terrifying allies and best friends, may they never change, and may they always be on our side. The toast was echoed with enthusiasm, various appendages raising drinks of all descriptions. As the group began to break up, the young cadet approached Kzik. Sir? One last question? Go ahead, young one. Do you ever miss serving with them? Kazik's antennae twitched in amusement. Every day. Combat operations are much more predictable now, much more sensible. Sometimes I find myself thinking, what would the humans do in tough situations? Usually the answer is something completely insane that just might work. He patted the cadet with one of his upper arms. Word of advice? If you ever get the chance to serve with humans, take it. Yes, they'll terrify you. Yes, they'll make you question everything you know about warfare, physics, and the nature of reality itself. But you'll never have better friends, better allies, or better stories to tell afterward. The cadet's bioluminescence pulsed in understanding patterns. Thank you, sir. Don't mention it. Now, would you like to hear about the time my squad decided to use a malfunctioning gravity generator as an improvised weapon? It involves 3 humans, a quantum physics violation, and what they called the galaxy's biggest game of ping-pong. As Kashyyyk launched into another tale, the bar settled into its normal rhythm of mixed-species conversation and commerce. But now and then, someone would glance over at the veteran's table, listening to his stories about the remarkable, terrifying, wonderful humans who had changed the face of warfare forever. One physics-defying, pun-making, coffee-fueled impossible victory at a time. And somewhere out there in the vast expanse of space, Human Strike Force Delta was undoubtedly doing something completely insane that would become someone else's bar story someday. Because that's what humans do. They make the impossible possible, and they do it with a smile, a bad joke, and absolutely no regard for what anyone else thinks is realistic. That's why they're winning the war. That's why the hive mind fears them. And that's why veterans like Kashyyyk will never run out of stories to tell about their time serving alongside the craziest species in the known universe. The ping-pong incident? Vorthak's mandibles clicked in anticipation. Even I haven't heard this one. Kashyyyks' compound eyes gleamed with amusement. Oh, you're in for a treat. Picture this. We're in the Cassiopeia sector, trying to clear out a hive mind forward base. Standard operation. Until we discovered they'd set up shop in an old research facility. The gathered soldiers leaned in closer, their various appendages twitching with interest. The protoplasmic bartender oozed closer again, forming what appeared to be rudimentary audio receptors. The facility had been studying gravity manipulation. Most of the equipment was damaged, but there was this one generator that was, let's say, enthusiastically malfunctioning. It was creating random gravity wells, making the whole area basically impossible to navigate safely. So you retreated to request specialized equipment? The Arcturian cadet asked hopefully. Kashyyyk chittered. You'd think that would be the sensible approach, wouldn't you? But no. Our human squad leader got that look in their eyes. You know the one. That gleam that means they've just had what they call a brilliant, terrible idea. Oh no, Tralexa whispered, her crystalline form vibrating with anticipation. Oh yes. They looked at the malfunctioning gravity generator, looked at their standard-issue plasma rifle, and said, and I quote, "Hey guys, who's up for some extreme sports?" The veteran took another drink, letting the suspense build. See, they'd noticed that the gravity wells were forming in a semi-predictable pattern. Not enough to navigate safely, but enough to... well, they called it gravity surfing. They didn't, Vorthak rumbled. They absolutely did. They calibrated their plasma rifles to fire in wide dispersion mode, creating these big balls of plasma. Then they used the shifting gravity wells to play ping-pong with them. With plasma? The cadet's bioluminescence flickered in patterns of disbelief. With plasma, they'd fire a shot, let the gravity wells catch it, and then use the natural oscillation to bounce it around the facility. The hive drones didn't know how to handle it. Their tactical algorithms couldn't process the concept of weaponized physics games. Kashyyyks' wings rustled with remembered excitement. The best part? It worked. The plasma balls would build up energy with each gravity bounce, getting bigger and more powerful. By the time they hit something, they were like miniature suns. We cleared the entire facility without taking a single casualty. That's impossible, someone muttered from the back. That's humans, Kashyyyk corrected. They turned a catastrophic equipment malfunction into a tactical advantage because nobody, not even the hive mind, could conceive of someone being crazy enough to try it. He shifted on his perch, antennae waving thoughtfully. But you want to know the really interesting part? After the operation, I asked our squad leader how they came up with the idea. Know what they said? I used to play beer pong in college. What's beer pong? Several voices asked simultaneously. Apparently it's some kind of human recreational activity involving throwing small spheres into containers of fermented grain liquid. For fun, because of course it is. Kashyyyks' mandibles clicked in what might have been exasperation. They literally adapted a drinking game into a combat technique. The bar had grown quiet again, everyone trying to process this new example of human ingenuity, or insanity, depending on your perspective. But wait, the cadet interjected. Wouldn't the gravitational forces have affected the humans too? How did they maintain their positions to make the shots? Kashyyyks' antennae twitched in what might have been a wince. Ah yes, that's where the extreme sports part came in. They used their magnetic boots to anchor themselves to various surfaces and... He paused, seemingly struggling with the memory. basically treated the whole operation like something they called skateboarding. Which is? Tralxa prompted. Another recreational activity. Apparently, humans enjoy attaching wheels to boards and then using them to defy gravity and common sense. They adapted the principle to use the facility's metal surfaces as rails and ramps, sliding between gravity wells while shooting plasma ping-pong balls at the enemy. The veteran took another long drink. I watched our squad leader do a backflip off a vertical wall, shoot 3 plasma balls into different gravity wells, land on a ceiling, and shout, "Cowabunga!" And when I asked them later what that word meant, they just shrugged and said it was radical dude speak. I'm starting to understand why the hive mind has trouble analyzing them, the Medusan observed. Exactly. How do you predict an enemy that treats combat like a game, physics like suggestions, and mortal danger like an entertainment opportunity? Kazik's compound eyes gleamed. But here's the truly terrifying part. They recorded the whole thing. Why? Several voices asked at once. For training purposes, they said. They actually developed a whole tactical doctrine based on what they called gravity well exploitation. It's now part of the standard human combat manual, filed under unconventional warfare techniques. The cadet's bioluminescence pulsed rapidly. They standardized it? Oh yes, they even improved on it. Last I heard, they were experimenting with something they called multi-dimensional billiards, using quantum uncertainty fields. Kazik's mandibles clicked rapidly. I'm actually glad I retired before they perfected that one. The veteran settled back, his wings rustling softly. You know what the official after-action report said? Innovative use of local environmental hazards led to successful mission completion with minimal casualties. That's how humans document their insanity. They make it sound completely reasonable on paper. But it worked, Vkr'lak pointed out. Of course it worked. That's the thing about humans. Their crazy plans work more often than they should. It's like they have some kind of reality-warping field that makes the impossible possible through sheer audacity. Kazik looked around at his audience, his compound eyes reflecting the bar's dim lighting. That's why the hive mind is losing. It can't adapt to an enemy that treats warfare like a cross between a physics experiment and an amusement park attraction. How do you counter an attack strategy based on recreational activities? How do you predict an enemy that looks at a catastrophic system failure and sees a tactical opportunity? You don't, the cadet realized. Exactly. You don't. You either learn to roll with it, or you get out of their way. Because humans? Humans will keep coming up with new ways to turn the laws of physics into their personal playground, and they'll do it with a smile, a bad pun, and probably while chugging that toxic bean juice they love so much. He raised his drink in another toast. To human innovation. May it continue to confound our enemies and entertain our allies. The toast was echoed enthusiastically, various drinking appendages raised high. You know, Kazik added thoughtfully. I heard they're working on something new now. Something about using quantum entanglement for what they call space volleyball. The gathered soldiers groaned collectively. I think I need another drink, Vkr'lak rumbled. Don't we all? Kazik agreed. Don't we all? Speaking of human innovations, the Medusan's tentacles rippled thoughtfully. I heard they've started incorporating something called memes into their battle strategies. Is that true? Kazik's entire body shuddered. Oh, Cosmos, yes. That's a whole other level of psychological warfare right there. Let me tell you about Operation Rickroll. Operation what? Tralxa's crystalline form sparkled with curiosity. It happened during the Battle of Proxima Centauri. The hive mind had developed these new quantum-encrypted communication channels. Completely unbreakable. Or so they thought. Kazik's mandibles clicked in amusement. Then our human communications officer had what they called an epic gamer moment. The veteran paused to order another round for the group. See, humans have this concept called trolling. It's like psychological warfare, but for entertainment. And they had this ancient piece of media, this music video as they called it. What's a music video? The cadet interrupted. Audio-visual entertainment combining rhythmic sound patterns with synchronized imagery. This particular one featured a human with red head fur performing what they called a dance routine. The humans considered it simultaneously annoying and hilarious. Vkr'lak's carapace rustled. I fail to see the military application. That's because you're thinking logically, Kazik explained. The humans didn't try to break the hive mind's encryption. Instead, they figured out how to insert this video into the quantum stream itself. Every time the hive mind tried to send a command, their forces received this red-headed human singing, "Never gonna give you up, never gonna let you down." "That doesn't sound so bad," Tralxa offered. It wasn't, the first time, or the second, but the humans set it up to repeat, endlessly, with increasing volume each time. The hive mind drone commanders started experiencing what the humans called sensory overload. Their tactical coordination completely fell apart. The veteran's antennae twitched with remembered amazement. But here's the really incredible part. Some of the drones actually started moving in sync with the music. The humans called it inadvertent choreography. They recorded it and turned it into something called a viral video. They weaponized entertainment. The cadets' bioluminescence flickered rapidly. "More like they entertained themselves with weapons," Kazik corrected. "That's another thing about humans. They can find amusement in literally anything. I once watched them turn a malfunctioning food synthesizer into something they called a disco light show." "Tell them about the karaoke incident," Vkr'lak prompted, his mandibles clicking with anticipation. "By the cosmic consciousness, I'd almost managed to suppress that memory." Kazik took a long drink. "So humans have this recreational activity called karaoke, where they deliberately sing badly for entertainment. During one particularly long deployment, they decided to hold a karaoke contest in the middle of a stealth operation." "They didn't," gasped several listeners simultaneously. "They did, but here's the thing. They modulated the frequencies to match the hive mind's sensor blind spots, used their awful singing as acoustic camouflage. The hive drone's audio sensors were so confused trying to categorize the sounds that we walked right through their perimeter." The veteran's wings rustled. The mission report listed it as innovative use of acoustic disruption techniques, which I suppose is technically true, even if the innovation in question was just humans being, well, humans. "But surely they take some things seriously?" the Medusan asked. "Oh, absolutely. Humans can be incredibly serious when it matters. It's just that their definition of when it matters is unique." Kazik's compound eyes seemed to unfocus slightly, lost in memory. "I once saw our squad leader spend 6 hours meticulously planning a rescue operation. Every detail perfect, every contingency accounted for. Know what the mission was for? Saving a local creature that looked like what they called a puppy." "A combat unit spent 6 hours planning to save a non-sentient creature?" Tralx's crystalline form vibrated with disbelief. "Not just planning. They executed the mission with more precision than I've seen in most high-stakes operations. When I asked why, our squad leader just showed me a picture of their own dog back on Earth and said, 'Because every good boy deserves to go home.'" Kazik's mandibles clicked softly. That's the thing about humans. They can turn anything into a joke, but they also find profound meaning in things most species would consider trivial. They'll risk their lives to save a small furry creature, then celebrate by having what they call a dance party in the middle of a combat zone. "How do you make sense of such contradictions?" the cadet asked. "You don't. You just accept that humans operate on a level of reality that doesn't quite match up with everyone else's. They exist in this strange space between absolute chaos and perfect precision, between deadly serious and utterly ridiculous." The veteran leaned forward conspiratorially. "Want to know the real secret to why humans are so effective in combat? It's not their resilience or their creativity, or even their weird relationship with physics. It's their ability to care deeply about anything and everything, while simultaneously treating nothing as too serious to joke about." "That makes no sense," Vkr'lak rumbled. "Exactly," Kazik's antennae waved enthusiastically. "That's what makes them impossible to predict. The hive mind can't calculate their next move because even they don't know what they'll care about next. One minute they're executing a precision strike on an enemy stronghold, the next they're setting up what they call a slip and slide in the ship's cargo bay using industrial lubricant." "A what?" several voices asked. "Trust me, you don't want to know. The ship's maintenance crew is still trying to get the stains out." Kazik shuddered. "But they called it team building, and somehow that made it an official military activity." The veteran looked around at his captivated audience. "You know what really keeps me up at night, though? The thought that everything we've seen humans do, all the physics-defying stunts, the impossible tactical innovations, the weaponized entertainment, that's them holding back. They're trying to work within our tactical frameworks, trying to make their reports make sense to our command structure." A nervous silence fell over the group. "I once asked our squad leader if humans had any other tricks up their sleeves. They just smiled. You know, that terrifying teeth-baring thing they do, and said space is just an ocean we haven't learned to surf yet. What's surfing? The cadet asked hesitantly. Another recreational activity involving riding on naturally occurring gravity waves in bodies of liquid water. But that's not the scary part. The scary part is they're probably already working on a way to actually do it. Kazik raised his drink one more time. To humans, the only species crazy enough to think of reality as an extreme sport, war as a chance for innovation, and physics as more of a polite suggestion than a law. The toast was echoed with a mixture of awe and trepidation. As the group began to disperse, the veteran added one final thought. You know what the funniest part is? Somewhere out there right now, some human is probably looking at a supposedly impossible problem and thinking, hey, what if we tried? And whatever follows that sentence will either revolutionize our understanding of the universe or give their commanding officer an aneurysm. Probably both. Or they're planning more space volleyball, Vkr'lak added dryly. Definitely both, Kazik agreed. Definitely both. The end.